Hello once again, and we're on chapter 6 of The Secret in the Old Attic, a Nancy Drew mystery story by Carolyn Keene. Reminder that permission to post an audiobook version of this book to YouTube was granted on March 27, 2020 by Penguin Random House Books for use with Voice Spears Junior Elementary until June 30th of 2020. All right, chapter 6, Nancy's Ruse. Hello, Diane. The Dyke girl looked up startled and barely acknowledged the greeting. I have a message for you, Nancy said. For me? What is it? Diane questioned apprehensively. Madame Perret asked me to tell you that your dress is not ready. Oh, Diane relaxed. Then her eyes snapped. That woman makes me tired. I wouldn't go to her anymore except she does make attractive clothes. You always look stunning, Diane, said Nancy. For the first time, Diane seemed to take note of what Nancy was wearing. I like the dress you have on. Did you have it made? Yes, I did, Nancy replied lightly, stifling a desire to smile. She was thinking how pleased Hannah Gruen would be to hear her handiwork was so highly praised. Aloud, she said, I'll be glad to drive you, Diane. Let me help you with your suitcase. Diane protested, but Nancy merely smiled. She took the bag and went to her car. Diane began complaining about the fact that there were never any porters around and that the family chauffeur was on vacation. When they got into the car, Nancy turned in the direction opposite the one to the Dyke residence. You're going the wrong way, Diane cried indignantly. Nancy quickly interjected. I just recalled that your father wants to see you at his factory right away. Madame Perret asked me to give you that message also. Nancy kept going until she reached a cluster of brick buildings. There, Diane said goodbye, adding that she would take a taxi home. But Nancy was not to be put off so easily. Oh, I don't mind waiting, she insisted. I have nothing else to do at the moment. Before Diane had a chance to object, Nancy was out of her car and walking into the building with her. Out of politeness, Diane was forced to introduce her to Mr. Dyke's secretary. I don't know how long I'll be with my father, Diane told Nancy. She said curtly, please don't bother to wait. After she had disappeared into the inner office, Nancy smiled at Miss Jones, the secretary. This must be a fascinating place to work, she said. Do you know all about the process of making synthetic material? Oh, I know a good deal, but far from everything, the young woman replied pleasantly. I'd love to go through the plant sometime. Do you suppose Diane would take me? Nancy said. Miss Jones smiled. She doesn't seem to be interested in her father's business at all. If you would like to take a quick look, I'll show you where I can. Of course, many of the processes used here are kept secret. Some I don't even know myself. Nancy's pulse leaped. She could hardly wait to start her trip through the factory, but she tried to appear calm. That's sweet of you, Miss Jones, she said. If you really can spare the time, I'd love to look around. As a rule, visitors are not permitted, but since you're a friend of Miss Dyke, here she appraised Nancy's dress with a complimentary look, I will be glad to take you through. As she and Miss Jones walked along the halls and up and down flights of stairs, the secretary explained the rudiments of making of synthetic cloth. It seems like magic, she said, that coal and oil can be turned into lovely soft materials so quickly. At other factories, oil and coal are made into colorless chemicals that we buy. Then they are put into tanks like the one you see over there and churned with chemical compounds for several hours. Is the result raw fiber solutions? Nancy said. Yes. Each is given a different trade name depending on the mixture and the composition. Nothing secret about that, thought Nancy. As Miss Jones led her further into the plant, Nancy kept her eyes open for a bushy trot. Although there were many workmen busy at their tasks, she saw no one who resembled the suspected thief. One thing she did take note of was a heavy door on the stairway landing at the far end of the building. A metal sign on it read, positively, no admittance, danger, keep out. I wonder if that's one of those secret places Miss Jones spoke about, Nancy said to herself. Maybe Bushy Trot is in there. Soon they reached the top of another stairway, and the secretary outlined the next process in making synthetics. Ahead of you is a machine known as the spinneret, she said. That's what makes the thread. Oh, it's remarkable, Nancy exclaimed, pretending to be watching nothing but this. At that moment, a bell rang several times. That's for me, said Miss Jones. I guess Mr. Dite wants me. We'll have to go back. If you don't mind, I'd like to look around a little bit longer, Nancy said. Well, I don't know, the woman paused. You really shouldn't, but stay if you wish. If I see Miss Dite, I'll tell her you're here. Nancy nodded and thanked Miss Jones for the tour. As soon as the secretary left the spinneret room, Nancy moved quickly up the stairway towards the forbidden room. I wish I could look in there, she thought. As Nancy hesitated outside, the door suddenly opened. A workman in soiled dungarees came out, carrying a package which looked as if it might contain a bolt of cloth. Although the door remained open only for an instant, Nancy obtained a fleeting glimpse of the interior. She saw several large chemical vats. Besides one of them, his back to her, stood a man with bushy black hair. Bushy Trot, Nancy thought herself excitedly, the man who used to work at the Booker factory. The door slammed shut, and she saw no more. Nancy deliberately loitered until the workman who had come out of the room disappeared down the hall. I must get a better look at that fellow with the bushy hair, she said. This is my chance to help Dad solve the mystery. Glancing quickly around and seeing no one, Nancy cautiously tried to open the door. To her dismay, it had a snap lock, and it would not budge. I must get in there, Nancy thought with determination. In a moment, she smiled to herself. I think I know how to do it. Pressing her lips close to the crack of the door to the secret room, Nancy screamed. The ruse was successful. From within came hurrying footsteps. The next instant, the door swung open. Nancy staggered inside, her hand over her half-closed eyes. Water, she murmured, water. The big bushy-haired man who had opened the door stared at her doubtfully. Are you sick? He asked in a coarse, heavy voice. Nancy did not want to answer questions. To avoid them, she pretended to faint. The act was well timed, for the man, frightened, immediately rushed into the hall for help. The young detective smiled. I'll bet that's Bushy Trot. When I describe him to Dad, he'll know for sure. No sooner had the door swung shut behind the man than she leaped to her feet. Eagerly she gazed about. The room resembled a laboratory. Near her were several vats of rainbow-colored solutions. Nancy had no opportunity to look further. Heavy footsteps warned her that the man was returning. She barely had time to stretch out on the floor before he came into the room. As the big, burly figure bent over her, Nancy pretended to revive. Opening her eyes, she gazed up into this ugly, cruel face. Here, drink this, he commanded. Nancy took a sip of water from the paper cup he offered her. I'm feeling better now, she murmured, sitting up. You don't work here, he said, scanning her face closely. How did you get into this part of the factory? He asked gruffly. Before Nancy could reply, the outside door swung open again. A stout, well-dressed man with piercing brown eyes stepped inside. Seeing Nancy, he paused in surprise. Tro, he stopped and then went on. What is the meaning of this? Why have you allowed a visitor here? It's not my doing, Mr. Dite, the employee muttered. She came in herself, said she was feeling sick. Then a little fresh air will help you, Mr. Dite said stiffly. Taking Nancy firmly by the arm, he assisted the girl to her feet and escorted her down the stairs into the main section of the factory. Who are you? He asked. Nancy explained she had brought Diane from the station, but did not give her name. It's dangerous for you to wander around this building by yourself. You must never do it again, he remarked in an icy tone of voice. Nancy thought Lawrence Dite seemed to be frightened. Had she stumbled upon his secret? When they approached the main entrance, he left her and Nancy headed for the parking lot. Diane was waiting inside Nancy's car. The two spoke little on the way to Diane's house. After accepting the girl's thanks, Nancy said goodbye, then drove at once to her own home. Dad, she greeted her father as she ran into the house. I had some real luck today. I think I've found Bushy Trot. Mr. Drew dropped his newspaper. Say that again, he requested. Nancy repeated the statement and quickly related the entire story of her visit to the Dite plant. Mr. Drew readily identified the suspect from Nancy's description of him. He was deeply impressed with his daughter's work and smiled when he heard of her ruse. Nancy, you're a fast worker and a thorough one, he complimented her. If that man actually is Bushy Trot and you say Mr. Dite started to speak his name, then my case seems to be shaping up. What's the next move? I'll arrange to have the man watched. We'll learn everything we can about him. Is there something else I can do? Nancy asked. You've already helped me a lot, Mr. Drew said. If there's anything more, I'll let you know. What she had discovered in the factory had increased Nancy's interest in her father's case. She hoped that soon she would be able to follow up more clues for him. In the meantime, she must tackle the problems surrounding Mr. March's mystery. Watch your step in that old attic, Mr. Drew warned her daughter. No telling what's up there. I promise, Dad, she said, smiling. The following afternoon, Nancy returned to the mansion. Susan and her grandfather were listening to the radio in the little girl's bedroom. As Nancy entered, the orchestra was playing a nice, happy new melody. As the sweet strains continued, Mr. March cried out, That's it! That's one of my son's compositions. I can't remember the name of it, but I certainly recall the tune. It's called Song of the Wind, Nancy said. Who do they say wrote it? Nancy asked. Who do they say wrote it? He demanded. I can't recall, Nancy said. When the composer's name was not announced, she said, Suppose I run downtown and buy a copy of the sheet music. Mr. March urged her to hurry and could hardly wait for her return. The composer is someone named Ben Banks, she told him as soon as she got back. Ben Banks, Ben Banks, Mr. March shouted angrily. Who's he? The man is a thief. That song was Phipps. Nancy promised to try locating this Ben Banks. She would get in touch with the publisher of Song of the Wind and ask for information about the so-called composer. I'll never rest until that rascal is found and exposed, Mr. March stormed. Why, the upstart, not only does he rob the dead, but he cheats Susan out of her rightful inheritance. The elderly man's tirade went on and on. To quiet him, Nancy offered to play a selection on the piano, so the two went downstairs to the music room. The old piano was badly out of tune, and she soon gave up. Nancy had just begun to sing the lovely song to Mr. March when, from upstairs, came a blood-curdling shriek for help. And that concludes today's chapter. We'll see you again soon.